Well, welcome to the reaction. Sarah Vine is away this week, so the fabulous Peter Hitchens is in for Sarah. We are going to start, of course, with the shocking events in Southport last night. Peter, an extraordinary week in Southport. Sleepy, beautiful. I've been there a few times. Merseyside town. First, the shocking killings of 3 little girls. Other people fighting for their lives in hospital. And then the, in some ways, shocking outpouring of violence by what seemed to me to be rent-a-mob just 24 hours, 36 hours later.
Can I start by saying there was a time when the whole discussion of this would have been far more restrained than it is now. And it's a time I look back on actually with regret that it's gone. There are many things about this which I would like to say, but I can't say because of very sensible rules about sub judice, about people who are too young to be named, and all kinds of things like this. I simply can't say them. But we now live in an overheated, almost medieval atmosphere because the old position where the great newspapers and the huge broadcasters were able to dominate the way in which news was spread has come to an end, and we now have a completely dangerous, uncontrolled rival in what I call anti-social media, in which all kinds of things can and do spread, often very dangerously, and I think that's at the heart of a lot of what's happened.
I mean, the internet, the social media, the great unregulated Wild West. I was doing some broadcasting the other day, and look, you and I know, Peter, that abuse on social media is part of the course, and that's okay. I don't mind. I don't take it personally. But what struck me was how often they were saying, why isn't the Daily Mail? Why isn't the Mail Online? Why aren't broadcasters telling us the name of this boy? We know his name. It's all over the internet. So you point out what the law of the land says. The accused person, the person who's been arrested, is 17. Therefore, he is regarded by the law as a child. We would have called it juvenile a few years ago, but now it's a child. So we can't name him. That would be breaking the law. Then they would come back and say, no. You're all part of a conspiracy of silence. These abusers stoked up the fires which caused the riots the other night.
I believe so, and a lot of it was made possible, it seems to me, again, by the fact that the authorities don't seem to have worked out a way of applying to anti-social media the restrictions which we in the responsible media have always, I think, observed with some seriousness. I'm very keen on observing them because I'm enormously committed to the presumption of innocence in trials. I think it's a vital part of our freedom. And if you start shouting and screaming about events before you even know what's happened and before people have been tried, then I'm afraid you make it almost impossible to have proper, fair justice in the country. So we have to abide by these rules. If other people aren't abiding by them, then steps, it seems to me, need urgently to be taken to make sure that people do abide by them. And that's the source of a lot of the damage, seeing what we see. And people on the streets throwing large stones and bricks torn from the walls of private houses at the police on the basis of wholly unsubstantiated rumours. People gathering round a mosque and attacking that and shouting revolting slogans at the people who use that mosque on the basis, again, of absolutely nothing apart from what I think we used to call scuttlebutt, which is a polluted stream of drivel which might flow through the minds of the ignorant, but which never saw the light of day before, and is now surging through the minds of people. It's frightening that we should be moving so rapidly away from the self-imposed order which we used to have in this country. And we weren't forced by anybody but our own self-government to behave like that.
Yeah, and what we can say, because what we know is, again, relating to this particular, what happened in Southport, the young man who's been arrested was born in Cardiff. That is a fact. We can say that.
Yes, we can say that.
And we can also say his parents are Rwandan, and they fled the terrible genocide from Rwanda, that African country, in the 1990s. And it occurred to me, Peter, while people are raging that potentially this boy might be Muslim, actually, when you look at the religious breakdown of Rwanda, 92% of Rwanda is regarded as Christian.
Indeed. It is a really strange thing that people are now using the word Muslim in this way. I am a practicing, communicant Christian member of the Church of England, I differ on large and important theological matters with Muslims, and in fact rather enjoy discussing it with them. And I've had many conversations, including interesting in that strange program I took part in last year, in which I was in a pretend prison. One of my cellmates was a very serious Muslim, and we discussed it a lot. And at one point, we ended up praying alongside each other. I take Islam very seriously as a faith, and I see it. I don't welcome some of its precepts, particularly its attitude towards women.
Sure.
But the way in which so many people now speak of it as if it was some kind of nameless threat seems to me to be dangerous, and also possibly coded for something else. And I think that we have to recognize that we have now living in our society brothers and sisters who have a different religion from the one that we may have grown up with.
It's almost become, for some people, just use the M word as a term of pejorative abuse.
There is that, and then there is the suggestion that someone, because they're Muslim, is perhaps more given to taking part in terrorist acts than other people. And of course, there have been Islamist terrorists, and there will be Islamist terrorists again. But I think that to jump from that to this sort of wider suspicion and attitude seems to me to be a mistake, a very large mistake. Actually.
And of course, the anger we saw on the streets in Southport, it was stirred up by misinformation, deliberate misinformation, in my view, on the internet. They even invented names for this. For the alleged assailant. Some of it, you get that people in some of these communities where there is a very large ethnic population feel the integration hasn't happened, and they feel they're strangers in their own town, they're strangers in their own city.
Yes.
And that is a big problem, and that's going to get worse.
And that has causes, and they have been political causes. The encouragement of multiculturalism by the British state, particularly in education and in other areas, has sometimes led to what were formerly communities, where now the two communities live in separate solitudes with their backs turned upon one another, and that is undoubtedly a grave political and social mistake which needs to be put right, and which we have to face. But it doesn't in any way excuse the sort of behaviour which we saw in Southport. On the contrary, if you want to bring it to an end, and that's the last conceivable route that you would want to take.
Yeah, the police again. I thought I was very struck by it. They each day often put their lives on the line for us, all of us, and yet there they were having bricks thrown at them, and these are the people who have to enforce the law. I think nearly 40 police officers were into 29 going to hospital, and the mother of one of those 3 children said, "Don't do this in our name.
No, it's true.
The violence must stop."
But nor in mine. I mean, I think both of us here and everyone who works for our newspapers is very much in favour of the enforcement of law and order.
Yeah,
and therefore we have to. I have many criticisms of the police, which this isn't the occasion to air, and have written and spoken them for many years. But where it's a matter of order or disorder, then the civilized person has to stand behind and support the police in maintaining order. And people who think that they're in some way patriotic or conservative, who attack the police, seem to me to have completely misunderstood what they think they believe.
And I saw some of those scenes, the clear-up, the aftermath. It looked to me like we were back in Belfast on the Falls Road in the 1980s and 1970s.
All disorder has this dispiriting, miserable look to it, doesn't it? And because you look at it and you think, here's actually, society is very fragile. It's why the sound of breaking glass is so disturbing. That we can have glass in the windows of our houses because we're civilized, because glass is so incredibly easy to break. And we've lived for so long in social peace that we forget how very easy it is, and has been in parts of Europe recently, beginning in former Yugoslavia and now moving further east. It's so easy for that kind of peace to come to an end and for people to be at each other's throats. You have to be so careful not to let it begin, because once it's got out of control, then it can take years, if ever, to get it back under control, and you then lose that that wonderful thing of ordered, voluntary peace, which we've had as a great luxury in this country for so long.
Do you worry, Peter, with the scale of immigration every year? We don't call it immigration anymore. We call it migration. Immigration, the scale of it, a major city every year. We had the housing secretary, Angela Rayner, the deputy prime minister,
yes,
wittering on about her plans to create how many houses a year? 375,000 houses. She didn't say that one of the factors why there is a major shortage of housing, apart from the problems with the planning system, apart from the fact developers sit on land until it's better, they can get a better value and flog it for housing, is because of the huge influx of migrants.
No, this is two arguments which merge into one. The first argument was at the stage when, quite early on in the New Labour years, the amount of migration into this country increased enormously.
Deliberately.
And well, as the amazing article written in the Evening Standard by Michael Andrew Neither, who was a speechwriter for the New Labour machine, a sort of apparatchik, which I publicised a lot, made it plain that there were certainly some people in New Labour who saw large-scale migration as a way of changing the country irrevocably. Now, faced with that, if you can't prevent it from happening, what do you do? And again, in this matter, the Christian religion offers me no alternative. I have to love my neighbour as myself. If people are here, then we have to learn to live alongside each other. Mm. And any talk suggesting that that people should be deported or driven out in any ways is intolerable to me. We have to learn. It may have been a mistake, but we have to learn to live with it. But at the same time, governments have got to develop serious policies so that the levels of migration, which this country in particular and much of Europe have experienced over the past 15 to 20 years, come to an end, because it's going to be very, very hard to do that, loving of your neighbour in the circumstances which then follow. That's the difficulty.
Yeah, but it is dishonest, though, isn't it, to talk about the crisis in housing and not acknowledge?
It is dishonest. It's dishonest by omission, and also it's particularly dishonest in the case of this government, which has never had, even attempted to have a policy on migration. Now, I didn't think much of the policy of the previous government on migration, though in fact I took some of it back on the Rwanda policy when it was clear that quite a lot of people were moving on from the United Kingdom to the Republic of Ireland because they were concerned that the Rwanda policy might affect them, which seemed to me to be a vindication.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was quite remarkable that even after that the Starmer Labour Party continued to treat Rishi Sunak's policies with contempt, because there was obviously something going on there. And they have nothing. To say some special prosecutor, they have nothing to say about this.
They're going to smash the gangs, Peter.
Well, you see, this is slogan stuff, isn't it? This is slogans instead of politics. I do think they floundered for years, but I do think towards the end of their time, the Tories were beginning to understand, first of all, their own political survival depended on doing something, and secondly, that there were things which they might do. I think we need to move on to the whole nature of international law on refugees, and that any serious government's going to have to turn to that in the end, because we base all our migration and asylum policies on circumstances, 70 years ago now, which simply don't apply. That has to change, and the major nations of the world have to change it. But there was among the people who'd previously been, it seemed to be incredibly complacent for a very long time, a realization in the last government that something really ought to be done, and they were trying. This lot, they have nothing to say. It's astounding how little they have to say, especially given that it is, in many cases, it's their voters, the Gillian Duffys of the country, who have been most disturbed by what's happened.
Yeah, and many of those voted reform in large numbers in the last election.
I think so, yes.
I think the pollsters, it's not been written yet, the story, but the pollsters got it very badly wrong again in that election, because the Tories were meant to be 20 points behind, they were 10 points behind. Labour have won with the smallest share of the vote in eons. But Reform was second in 100 Labour seats, and seats where I suspect, Peter, the big issue is immigration. Well, Labour don't have an answer.
I suspect it is, but in discussing the answer, you and I and everybody in politics has a duty to be, and Southport establishes this, it seems to me, has a duty to be extremely careful.
Yeah, of course.
What we say and how we say it. No dog whistling.
No.
No, nothing of that kind, because social disorder is terrifying. And once it breaks out, nobody is safe. And nobody should wish it. Nobody should take any kind of joy in seeing this sort of thing going on, because if you wish it on others, you wish it on yourself. And when it comes to you, it is terrifying. You've seen, you've been in this trade a long time. You've seen what happens when things turn nasty. So have I. And it is so frightening. The feeling that you're on your own, that there is no authority, is so frightening.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about Southport, but what's got almost gone under the radar, Peter, was these extraordinary scenes, which I know you've seen on the internet, where else, of course, of these machete-wielding louts, thugs, call them what you will, 6, 7, was it 8 of them, 9 of them, in Southend-on-Sea, summer's day, 6 o'clock in the evening.
Yes, I know.
Just yards from the pier and the funfair where children are playing, running amok, trying to take chunks out of each other. Unbelievable.
There's a simple thing here. A sane, rational, moral person who came into this room holding a machete, as we must call them, would be no threat to you and me. An irrational and perhaps insane person who came to this room with the top of a biro would be a terrifying danger. Yeah. It's not the weapons that's at the point.
It's the intent.
It's the readiness to behave in extremely violent ways. And I because this is general and we're not here talking about a particular case, I will here make a point which I have been making tirelessly now for many years. The most fundamental problem in this country, and the deepest reason for the amount of actually unhinged violence which we face, is the way in which we've totally ceased to try and prevent the spread of drugs, particularly of marijuana in this country. This is a drug the use of which is strongly correlated with severe mental illness. I'm not talking about people when they're actually stoned. I'm talking about long-term users of this drug who become irreparably, in many cases, mentally ill and, in some cases, violent. There's a very interesting book on this called Attacker Smoked Cannabis, written by a friend of mine. He combed through the local newspapers of the country for years looking for, and there are so many cases of, and this isn't just violence, this is completely inexplicable, irrational, stupid, crazy violence committed by people who have been long-term users of this drug. And yet, rather than tightening the laws against its possession and use, we constantly weaken them, and it's a very popular cause in the political class and in the media class that we should get rid of what remaining laws we have against what must be one of the most dangerous drugs. And if even to say that is a heresy which will draw upon me the fury of the legalizers, but it is demonstrably true.
Yes,
Professor Sir Robin Murray, one of the great leading psychiatrists of the country who practices in South London, just isn't in any doubt about the link between the use of marijuana and mental illness.
But do you think you're becoming an increasingly lonely figure in this debate?
I don't mind about that. You can be lonely for years, and then suddenly you can find that people come round. In fact, in many cases, if you have anything important to say, you can pretty much guarantee to be lonely to begin with. But on this, I had things that I was saying 10, 15 years ago. When I initially began to make, people would say to me, no, this country it has brutal laws against marijuana. People are constantly being locked up and arrested. And I said, no, they're not. And I would be shouted down at public meetings or outvoted. Nobody says anymore that the laws against marijuana are enforced. And also the truth that it is correlated. I can't say linked because the experiments have not been done to show an actual link between its use and mental illness, but the correlation between its use and mental illness has now been so strongly established that is now, I think, generally accepted. Yet at the same time, an extraordinary piece of doublethink, you'll find bodies like the Home Affairs Committee of the House of Commons more or less calling for the relaxation of laws against it, or saying, which is not true, that it's impossible to fight. Japan, particularly, and South Korea, both law-governed democratic nations, successfully prosecute and deter the use of marijuana in their societies. And we could do the same.
I don't recall reading very often about gangs of machete-wielding thugs rampaging around the streets of Osaka.
No, you don't. I mean, there is crime in Japan, but it's mainly confined within serious gangs. Japan also had a major drug problem of amphetamines after the war, which was one of the reasons why their drug laws are so stringent. But the other thing which goes with this is, as long as the law against drugs is strongly enforced, social disapproval of their use continues. Now, there's an awful lot of fashionable middle-class rich people, particularly in the better off parts of London, who think there's nothing wrong with smoking marijuana themselves or in allowing their children to do it. It's fashionable. It's generally believed to be okay. If the law were properly enforced, I think you'd find that would change because moral fashion follows law.
Yeah, and those people puffing away on their joint in the fashionable Islington dinner party probably think it's so terrible when they hear about another young man, often black, who's been stabbed to death, probably in a drug-related gang killing in inner London. They do not seem to understand there is a connection with their joint at their dinner party.
It's this double think.
Yeah.
And that's what my task is, to somehow or other cross this line in people's minds where they can see A and they can see B, but they won't connect the two.
Fascinating.
It was amazing to me during the weeks of the election, saying to people, look, this is the Labour Party, and it's not just the Labour Party, it's a very left-wing Labour Party. Of course they're going to raise tax. This is a party which is standing for election on a manifesto of blank pages. They're not saying what they're going to do. And the last big Labour government that came in 1997, most of the major things it did, it never told you. And people said, oh, you're just doing Tory propaganda. I said, no, I'm just warning you. This, if you let a Labour government in, this is what will happen. Here I am, I told you so, within an amazingly short period of time. And it's not just that, by the way, just bung in the other little thing, which Bridget Phillipson, the Education Secretary, while chewing up parents with very little money who scrape it together to send their children to private schools, while she chews them up out of spite, what she's also done is she's killed this is an amazing thing for a government to do. A bill which was actually passed, became an act, had royal assent, protecting free speech in universities, and she's preventing that from becoming law so that it won't actually take effect. I've never seen a government do that before, and these are two things. It seems to be really indicative of what a nasty government this is and is going to be, with this amazing leap now into an admission they're going to bung taxes up, and the actually rather pitiable complaint, we didn't have any idea there wasn't any money. Of course they knew perfectly well how little money there was.
Well, and we know that because she said in the Financial Times about 6 weeks ago, Rachel Reeves, and I have to hear again, she's the first woman Chancellor of the Exchequer, so what? But she said in 6 weeks in the Financial Times, we don't need a general election to tell us what's going on with the books because we've got the Office of Budget Responsibility.
And there are gaps. I mean, it is true that the Home Office has a way of spending money without telling anybody, and that they can point to that and say, well, we didn't know. Well, they didn't know about it, and that's true, but it's a very small proportion of the money involved, and it doesn't actually, it's nothing like as big as the amount of money they've committed themselves to spend. They dug a black hole by granting the public sector pay rises in total. They didn't have to do that.
Almost three times.
They went and they got out the black shovel and dug the black hole, and there it is. And,
what is it, 5.5, 5.6% for public sector? But the junior doctors will get a 22% rise over 2 years. Some of those, of course, earn 96,000. Here's the extraordinary optic, Peter, as well, which is a government that's all about optics and grids and how things look. They announce that at the same time they say to 10 million pensioners, we were bringing Great British Energy, that will take £300 a year off your energy bill. Well, actually, that's not going to happen now, after all, possibly until the next Parliament. But we're also going to take your winter fuel allowance off us, even though the new Chief Secretary of the Treasury only 6 weeks ago was saying to the Tories, don't dare touch the winter fuel allowance. 10 million pensioners will lose it, including some who are only on £200 a week.
One suspects all the time. In fact, one expects dishonesty in politicians. I don't. I've been in this trade long enough to know that they tell absolute lies. They're allowed to. The law doesn't. The rules on dishonest advertising specifically don't cover politics. For that reason, we know that they lie. But this is Olympic. Is the lying which is going on at the moment. Oh, we never knew. We had no idea. Oh, come on. And then there's this slight feeling, it seems to me, I mean, I don't know whether you feel it, of panic that they don't really know what they're doing. The way in which Rachel Reeves was speaking in the Commons the other day.
Well, she looked like, talking about the Olympics, she was in a 400-metre sprint.
But she was talking so fast.
She was.
In a way which suggested quite considerable nervous tension.
Yeah.
Now, I am not actually a great admirer of Gordon Brown, though I think he is a man of accomplishment and character. As a politician, I think he did a lot of harm. But good heavens, he was a man of weight.
Yeah.
You'd have to strive very hard to get Gordon Brown into a panic. And even if he did panic, he'd be very, very good at hiding it. This was a person of real political strength. You haven't got that here. You've got minor people, really semi-qualified people holding great offices of state in difficult times. And you have to wonder whether they aren't floundering.
I also heard her doing some of the interviews. Robotic is an understatement.
Yeah.
She's got the mantra. She's got the script. It's in front of her. And I think Starmer's a bit like that too, and saying there will be more difficult decisions. There will be more. But what she means is there's going to be more lies because they were specific. There was to be no tax rises, not on working people. But apparently if you apply capital gains tax, which often applies to people who employ working people, that doesn't count.
Yeah, but there was the revelation, wasn't there, with the Nick Ferrari interview, that working people didn't mean working people.
That's right.
It meant people with no savings.
That's right.
So presumably that's still going to apply, but there's an awful lot of people, including Labour voters and working class people who save, who are going to be hit by these changes. And anybody who tries to put together a pension, of course, the social care, the collapse of the social care programme, again, just years of work and thought chucked into the bin in a second.
Yeah, and they're talking about having a royal commission. I know what that means. Not just the long grass, that's the jungle. That's lost for years and years.
Takes minutes and lasts years.
We had something in 2011 called the Deal Not Report.
Well, that's it, yeah.
There it is. It's all there. And there was about to be a cross-party agreement on it with Cameron, Miliband and Clegg. I think Cameron pulled the rug on that. But there it is, it's in black and white. Not much has changed. Royal Commission, and I thought they are not serious.
Did you hear Andrew Dillon on the radio? He was really broken-hearted about.
And this is a man who doesn't do incensed and doesn't do
emotion.
No,
he doesn't. He absolutely doesn't. He's a very serious person, and not partisan, I think. And he just saw ages and ages of hard work and thought just chucked into the wastebasket.
And it was also in the election campaign. We had the IFS saying, the Institute of Fiscal Studies saying, there was a great deception of silence over taxes. There was also great deception of silence over social care. It's shaming that a government coming in with a majority of 172 or something, Peter, the largest since 1997, one of the first acts to do is to junk what was going to come in October. That cap on social care costs was coming in October, 85,000, raising the threshold from about 23 to 100,000. It's unbelievable.
They're just telling you that nothing is safe. No promise which this government made on any subject at all of any kind is safe now.
Do you think they think, get away, do all the horrible, unpopular stuff in the first year, and then in a few years' time, everybody will have forgotten?
It may be so. I don't know. As I say, I suspect that they've lost their way very quickly, that they wanted to be in government because they wanted to be in government, but they never really had the capacity, either the intellectual or the political capacity or the experience, to know what it was that they were going to do. I would grant this to New Labour in 1997. They had an elaborate, and this again has a lot to do with Gordon Brown, and also with Alistair Campbell. And
Robin Cook was a pretty big thinker too.
They knew what they were going to do in great deal. They didn't tell us about much of it, but they knew.
They didn't know about the independence of the Bank of England, did they?
No, and nor did they. And as we know, because Alex Brummer has told us about it, they deliberately suppressed and kept from being published details about the first big raid on pensions, which is sort of the equivalent of what we're going through now.
Yeah.
So they kept it secret, but they had a plan, and they knew pretty much. Then they were also handed by Ken Clarke an economy in a much better state than the one that this lot have inherited. It wasn't as bad as they say, but it was still in a considerable mess. And the COVID disaster has destroyed much of the economy of much of the Western world. Can't get out of that.
And of course, this week we should mention it, although not really people are talking about it for good reason. For what it's worth, I keep telling Tory mates of mine, go away and hide under a stone. Nobody wants to hear from the Tory party at the moment, but we've got the 6 runners and riders for the leadership contest, and I don't look at any of those and think, that's it. It's the new Thatcher. That's it. It's the new Radical.
But I myself don't yearn for a new Thatcher. You may, but I don't. I'm not an admirer of the Iron Lady. I
loved her, Peter.
Come up. Well, there you are. You see. I quite appreciated her at the time, but I've found as the years have gone by, I don't feel that she was actually as good as she looked. So I wouldn't necessarily want a new Thatcher. I wouldn't mind. What I want and what I can get are so totally different in British politics that I wouldn't mind a sort of a new Ken Clarke, only without the obsession with the European Union.
Yeah,
somebody economically competent, and politically able to run a ministry, for instance, and to have done so, but without that particular piece of baggage. I mean, that's simply from the point of view of me as a citizen, rather than me as somebody who has high ideals for the country.
I'm with you, because look, Ken was Education Secretary, Home Secretary and Chancellor, and Home Secretary normally destroys everybody, never destroyed him, because he was such a big beast. And
very ruthless too,
he was,
as Dominic Lawson will point out to you. The chummy aspect of Ken Clarke pretty quickly dissolved when he was in need of a bit of self-preservation.
Yeah.
But that, in a proper politician, you're going to have that, aren't you? There's a certain amount of killer instinct. But looking at the politicians of the past, the Tory politicians of the past 20 or 30 years, in simple terms of competence and ability to manage, which would be a nice change, I think, then that would be something to look for in this bunch of new candidates. I don't see it.
No. Well, they're going to turn the Tory party conference into a modern R version of the Republican or Democratic convention, the beauty parade without the beauties, in my view.
Well, yes. Well, I'm not going.
Welcome back to The Reaction. We have some voice notes with some fascinating questions. Let's hear our first one.
Hello, absolutely love The Reaction. Josh from Barnstable here. The Chancellor says that there's a £22 billion black hole in public finances. Jeremy Hunt says his team were totally transparent with the books. And this is politics from Rachel Reeves. Who should I believe?
Well, both of them in a way. There has been some money hidden. The Home Office in particular has spent money which they don't seem to have told anybody about, but it doesn't remotely amount to the sums of money which Rachel Reeves is complaining about. Much of her problem is of her own making, because she's decided to grant these public sector pay rises, which have given her an enormous bill she has to pay. So it is largely not politics. The truth is, no professional politician, especially nobody shadowing the Treasury, knowing anything about government for the past several years, as Rachel Reeves has done, could be in any doubt that there was a black hole of a very considerable size. And she certainly can't have been in any doubt when she granted those pay increases that she was going to make her difficulties much greater.
And Josh, in my view, what she's doing, Peter's quite right, she's being totally disingenuous, of course she is, but she's taking a leaf out of George Osborne's book. When they came in 2010, the Tories, after the big financial crash, they said the books that there was no money in it left. Remember the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Liam Byrne, who left the note saying there's no money left. So the Tory message from the beginning was, we've got to fix the roof or something while the sun's shining, something like that, wasn't it? Some old cliche.
Yep.
So the whole point was we need austerity because Labour spent all the money. This is what Rachel Reeves is trying to do. The Tories left us with these finances in a terrible mess. They lied and lied and lied, and they hope that narrative sticks, and because that's the narrative they're going to stick to. I think we've got another.
Hi both, absolutely love the show. It's Miranda here from Richmond in Yorkshire. Now, I just want to ask, is it fair that we bring VAT in for private schools halfway through the academic year?
Well, I don't think VAT on private schools is fair at any point in any year. I think it's wicked, class war of the worst sort. It's not going to hit any of the big institutions like Eton or Winchester, where the former Prime Minister went to. It won't raise anything like the money they've got. It's going to drive children who are very settled in their private schools into the state sector, which has got there's no space or provision for them. I think it's made worse by the fact it's coming in January, but I think the whole policy is wicked from start to finish. And I speak as one who went to a comprehensive, by the way.
Well, I speak as somebody who went for a while to private schools and then left, but I think this is an act of spite. I don't think it has any educational or indeed tax-raising purpose at all. I think it's purely done to please that part of the Labour Party and its supporters who have an animus towards a dislike of private education. The only people who will be hurt by it will be those people who really have to struggle to pay school fees. The truly rich won't be bothered in the slightest by VAT on school fees. It will only be those who have to save, who have to not have holidays every year, who live in smaller houses than they otherwise would, and run cheaper cars or no cars at all because they think education is so important. Why any government would make an attack on a part of the population which regards education as more important than holidays or cars or houses, I do not know, because these are the kind of people you really need to encourage in a society.
Quite right too. Peter, we've got an interesting question here from Scott in Somerset, who says, I'm confused. Norway has a wealth fund of $1.62 trillion. The UK has a debt of $3.57 trillion. It's my understanding we're going to borrow another 10 and call it a wealth fund, only in the UK. I'm confused.
Well, I think both Norway and Britain had an opportunity to build up an enormous sovereign wealth fund when North Sea oil and gas were discovered. Britain, I think, chose to spend it on deindustrialization, on the enormous welfare payments to those people who were put out of work during that period. I think that is actually factually true. That's what happened to the money. Norway, simply not having that kind of problem or that sort of population, were able to do differently. Britain is a country which lives very much on its reputation, on credit built up in the past, and which is, in my view, and has been for some time, in pretty major financial trouble in terms of trade deficits, which used to be so important in my childhood and teens, everyone forgets now, and in terms of the level of government spending, the high levels of taxation. We're not the same sort of country as Norway. Norway has a very small population. It's really a city-state more than a country. We have a huge population, and we have a country which is in many ways still recovering from the Industrial Revolution and what followed. So it's not fair to say that we can't do as well as Norway. We have different problems, but I do think the country's economy is very badly managed, and I do think a lot of politicians have been very unrealistic about it. But I would add to that the huge spending of money to keep people away from work during the great COVID panic has made our economy far, far worse, as I predicted at the time it would, than it needed to be. And getting out of that mess is going to entail a great deal of hard work and privation over the time, whoever's in government.
And Peter, also, of course, it's meant a whole generation. I don't think they have to go into the office. They don't have to go to work. And I just don't think you get the same levels of productivity.
One of the benefits of being the first industrial country in the world is the level of work discipline which this country attained, that people just got used to the idea. You went to work, and the great government's supported stay-at-home plan of the COVID period has undermined that quite possibly fatally. I think a lot of people don't actually intend ever to go back to regular daily work. I've been a long-distance commuter for many years, and it's quite noticeable how many of the people who used to travel alongside me have just vanished.
There was a lovely Italian cafe which had been in Marsham Street opposite the Home Office for 45 years.
Was that the one that did the very good breakfasts?
Yeah. So it's no longer there, because he told the lovely man who owned it, I think his name was Bruno, I did a piece about this. He said before the pandemic he was selling maybe 820 coffees a day, and they buy their sandwiches and all the other stuff. After the pandemic, down to 140.
Yeah, it's hopeless.
So he laid off staff, and then in fact he closed.
People forget.
How sad.
People forget how very much businesses are dependent on the great flow of people into big cities and out of them, and they were just ruined. And those small businesses which have managed to survive, I have such admiration for. I have a particular newsagent in Oxford whom I use. They have managed through really, really hard work and enterprise to keep their heads above water, but it's been extremely difficult. And this has been the case for many people. And it is, as I say, a result, in my view, of a major mistake of government. And it knocks on, because when a small business closes, then people lose their jobs, then an area ceases to be as prosperous as it was. We need to think very seriously about whether we want to continue down this path, and if we don't, what we're going to do to set it right.
And one of the worst offenders, of course, our civil service.
Well, again, they I think many of them thought that they could carry on working from home with the same. But in fact, it isn't the same, is it? Deal with any government department, as you and I do all the time. The difficulty of getting in touch with a simple press officer
to answer the phone
is it's 10 times harder.
Yeah, it is.
And everything has to be done by email rather than by phone half the time as well, which of course puts them at arm's length. If someone wants to stop answering your questions on email, they just stop replying to you.
I know.
And it's really difficult now to get anything out of government.
And if you're trying to get your driving license sorted out or your passport sorted out, forget it. It's so. Thank you for that question. Now, this is a very interesting question from Anonymous, who says, "My burning question. Nothing's been mentioned by any party as far as I know about care home fees being capped to protect our life savings." Well, we've sort of talked about that a bit, Peter, because this Labour government has abandoned the cap that was coming in October.
The cap is gone. And so, alas, no, it's unlimited money again. And so everything that you have will be taken from you if this thing happens to you, which happens to so many people.
Yeah. I mean, dementia is going to get more and more people have dementia. We're getting older.
Yes, and the cost of this care is colossal, and it some way does need to be found of dealing with it, and a sort of way had been found by the hard work of Andrew Dilnot, and now it's been binned again. And we were talking about this a little earlier in the programme. The Labour government is talking about setting up a royal commission. Peter and I have covered these before. In other words, it's a hot air talking shop. It will put the issue back 4 years. So many years. That is what these things are designed to do, is to postpone them way beyond the life of the government.
It kicks into the next parliament, and of course, if they only do one term, then it's the next government's problem.
Yeah, even if it's that quick.
So that's it. Thank you for that. I'm sorry we ended on a not such a positive note, but Peter and I could have talked about the Olympics, because we're doing very well in the Olympics, Peter, but you and I don't know much about it.
We could have done. I know a lot about opening ceremonies.
Well, can I just say about that opening ceremony, is it still going on? It's Wednesday. It started on Saturday at about 7 p.m. I think on Sunday afternoon when I put the TV on, it still seemed to be going on. I haven't
checked lately, but you might be right. But in my view, however bad it was, because it's in France, it can't conceivably be as bad as the British one, which I really loathed.
A loathing and damnation down on this podcast for saying that, Peter.
Well, I don't care. It was awful.
Yeah,
and it still makes me shudder to think of it.
The Paris opening ceremony was very bad, but come on, UK, you're doing very well on the medals table. We were meant to have a discussion, Peter and I, about whether Andy Murray is the greatest British sportsman, but
I didn't know which sport he played in, so we were stuck.
I think it's shuttlecock.
Oh, right.
Do we play shuttlecock?
Or is it whiff?
Is that an Olympic sport?
Whiff-waff. Do you know cricket was an Olympic sport?
Well,
at the first Paris Olympics in, I think, 1904, and it was an Olympic sport, and Britain played France.
Did we win? We
won, and France therefore got the silver medal, so France still holds the only silver medal for cricket.
Oh, that's a great
There's
story.
a thing that not everybody knows.
Well, that's it from The Reaction. Thank you very much for listening. Sarah Vine will be back with me next week. Don't forget, we do want to hear from you. We want to hear your voice note questions. If you leave a comment, you can leave it on Spotify, or you can email reaction@dailymail.co. Start again. Well, thank you very much for listening to The Reaction. Sarah Vine will be back with us next week. Please send us your questions on voice note, or of course you can email us reaction@dailymail.co.uk, or if you have a comment on Spotify, or to remind you again, send us a voice note on WhatsApp on 07796 657 512. I'll repeat that for you, 07796 657 512. Start your message with the word reaction.